This is such a heavy topic. So, are you saying that the US government is actually considering stopping aid that could save lives overseas? That sounds extreme. Can you give me a bit more context?
Absolutely. Let me set the stage for you. Just last month, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that life-saving humanitarian work would be exempt from a freeze on foreign aid. Global health workers were relieved, thinking their vital programs would continue. But then just days later, a new directive came down telling USAID staff to hold off on any more approvals pending further directions. It's like they pulled the rug out from under everyone's feet.
Hold on. So they said one thing, and then did another. That's wild. What kind of impact does this have on the ground? Are people really suffering because of this?
Oh, absolutely. Without access to funding, organizations that partner with USAID can't pay their workers or suppliers. The Norwegian Refugee Council, for example, which does US-backed humanitarian work in about 20 countries, says it has millions of dollars in outstanding payment requests to the US government. Civilians in conflict zones like Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Sudan are at risk if this work stops. Imagine being in a war-torn area relying on food and medical supplies that suddenly aren't coming anymore. It's a real crisis.
That's terrifying. So, what's the reasoning behind this? Is there some grand plan here? Or is it just chaos?
Well, it seems to be a mix of both. Elon Musk, who's been given a lot of power by President Trump to oversee changes at USAID, has been involved in dismantling parts of the agency. He's accused USAID officials of trying to undermine efforts to terminate programs. But here's the kicker. Those reviews would be needed to grant the waivers promised by Mr. Rubio. It's a catch-22 situation. And now unions and companies are scrambling to push back against these cuts through lawsuits, arguing that the downsizing measures are unconstitutional and illegal.
Wait. Elon Musk? The same Elon Musk who runs X and Tesla? Why is he involved in this? Isn't this way outside his wheelhouse?
You're right, it is unusual. Musk has posted dark conspiracy theories about the aid agency on his social media platform, X. He seems to believe that USAID is somehow corrupt or mismanaged. But the reality is that this agency has been doing crucial work for decades. For instance, USAID has been instrumental in fighting diseases like Ebola and HIV. When Musk claims that funding has been turned on for these programs, it's not entirely true. The Ebola funding and virtually all of the HIV prevention funding remain frozen.
That's mind-blowing. So, it's not just about cutting costs, it's almost like there's an ideological battle happening here. But what about the argument that the US should focus on its own problems first? I mean, we have plenty of issues at home too.
That's a valid point, and it's a debate that's been going on for years. Some argue that the U.S. should prioritize domestic issues like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. But others point out that international aid isn't just about charity. It's also about national security and diplomacy. By helping other countries, the U.S. builds alliances, promotes stability, and prevents conflicts that could eventually affect us. Plus, many of these programs are relatively small in budget compared to domestic spending.
That makes sense. It's like planting seeds for future peace and prosperity. But what about the legal side of things? Can the president just cut off funding like this without Congress's approval?
Great question. The plaintiffs in the lawsuits argue that the downsizing measures are unconstitutional and illegal because Congress appropriated the funds for the agency and by law has to approve their withdrawal. Senator Charles Grassley, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, has even criticized President Trump for not abiding by the law when firing inspectors general. There's a lot of legal wrangling going on, and it's far from over.
Wow, this is getting more and more complex. So, where do we go from here? Is there any hope for reversing these cuts?
There are some glimmers of hope. Unions and companies have obtained temporary restraining orders against the president's efforts to dismantle the agency. And while the legal battles continue, Some employees have been given limited access to their work email accounts to prepare for their departures, but the overall outlook is uncertain. Many USAID employees expect most of the workforce to be fired or pushed out, with the few remaining absorbed into the State Department.
That's a tough pill to swallow. It feels like there's so much at stake here, both for the people working at USAID and for those who depend on their aid. Do you think there's a middle ground that could be reached?
Ideally, yes. A balanced approach would involve addressing domestic needs while maintaining a commitment to international aid. After all, these two goals aren't mutually exclusive. The U.S. can and should strive to improve conditions at home while continuing to support global initiatives that promote stability and well-being. It's a delicate balance, but one that's worth striving for.
Right. It's like walking a tightrope. You don't want to fall too far in either direction.